This is Call on the Field Stands. Hosts of the show are myself, Ryan Denchef, and Jeff Mapis. My buddy Jeff is not in attendance here tonight. Got some personal matters to attend to, but I wanted to get an episode out as there's a couple topics I wanted to touch on before we get into a slew of topics upcoming that are going to take up a bulk of our episodes. Particularly, I mentioned last week, Jeff and I on the podcast talked about doing a mock draft video. That's going to be coming next week. We wanted to get it this week, but as mentioned, Jeff's unable to get on the mics tonight. He's out doing some home shopping out here in the Cleveland area, looking for a new spot. And hopefully he will, well, not hopefully, it's my understanding, we're definitely going to be able to get that video recorded next week, the mock draft video. We're going to break down our entire first round, maybe give some extras. But in general, we're going to go through the entire first round, highlight some guys that we liked out of the combine, some spots where we expect different guys to go and the like. And we're also intending to do another episode of the mock draft type stuff after free agency because, you know, obviously a lot of things can change once free agents start getting taken off the board. And, you know, there's a lot of things that could really happen in that regard, really, especially with trades. You know, a lot of times you see trades so far as picks happening draft day. But you got to think there could be even some motion prior to draft day, particularly because, I mean, everybody knows Joe Burrow's going number one. That's almost a certainty. Everybody would be shocked, including myself, if Joe Burrow doesn't go number one to the Bengals, which ultimately means the Washington Redskins right now, as we speak today, are on the clock for the NFL draft. You know, they already have a quarterback drafted, Dwayne Haskins, last year. Obviously, he didn't have the greatest season. I think his first game was like week 8 or 9. He really struggled early on, threw a bunch of picks. Might even got benched and then came back in, you know, benched for a game, came back in the following and repeated his starts. But, you know, towards the end of the season, he really got his shit together and was playing a lot better. So I would be surprised. You know, we've heard rumblings that they might, attack and go get Tua at 2. I would be surprised if that happens. If I was the Redskins, I wouldn't do that. I'm sticking with Dwayne. He showed a lot of promise. Obviously, we saw what he did in college, throwing up 50 touchdowns and all that kind of stuff. So, I think they got their quarterback. There's a reason why they drafted him in the first round, and it wasn't to move on already, even though they got the new coach there in Rivera. So my assumption is they can go one of two ways. Obviously, they can either take Chase Young or Isaiah Simmons or Okudah potentially, but, he's had that injury at the combine. Probably not really anything major, but one would assume it's probably either Chase Young or potentially Simmons. A lot of people, and probably in our mock draft next week, we're going to have them taking Chase Young, but the fact that they're on the board right now, as we speak in, beginning of March, they could easily trade that pick. There's a lot of teams that are going to want a quarterback. There's a lot of teams that are going to want Tua, and if they can trade up and get him at 2, that could be pretty interesting. But without going through free agency, as I mentioned, who knows? There's so many quarterbacks that are up for grabs right now and potentially on the move. Obviously Tom Brady is one of the big names being mentioned of potentially leaving. I guess there was some talks that was reported with him and Belichick the other day that didn't really go that well. Phillip Rivers already said, he's already moved out of L.A. He's done with them. So there's a slot that's open. Who knows what's going to happen with Jameis Winston down in Tampa Bay. Las Vegas, almost called him Oakland. Las Vegas Raiders and Gruden over there could move on from Derek Carr. There's rumblings of that. There's just a lot of different things that could go on from now until the actual draft. So, we're going to readdress the mock draft once the free agency rolls through and a lot of these pieces fall into place, particularly the QBs. As I said, anybody could want to trade up at 2 and try to get Tua. And, there's a lot of teams, like even the Dolphins, that's who I'm probably going to, my suggestion when Jeff and I go through the mock draft, when we put it together, as we go back and forth on where people go, I'm going to think the Dolphins are going to get Tua, but they might get anxious and try to trade up to number 2 with the Redskins. So there's a lot of different things that can happen, and it's going to be interesting. You're just knowing that, they're on the clock right now, and they're on the clock and so in advance. We already know who's going number 1, and number 2 doesn't need a quarterback. So, there's a lot of different things that could happen. So looking forward to the mock draft next week. Like I said, there's going to be a video. We're going to throw that up on YouTube. Keep an eye out for that. I'm sure we're going to make plenty of clips for social media, Twitter, and all the like. So we're going to have some stuff out there, hopefully get some comments and some feedback and some interactions with the peeps out there on that. But like I said, I wanted to get this in this week because I do want to go over a little bit of NBA overview recap. There's a couple topics. We saw, LeBron versus Zion matchup from the other night was really a great matchup on ESPN. They faced off a couple nights before that as well. That was sparked a lot of interesting conversation. You got Giannis versus LeBron for the MVP. You got Zion or Ja for the Rookie of the Year. Whether or not that's a debate, we even mentioned it a while ago, Jeff and I did, when we talked, a little bit of NBA. Could Zion coming in even mid-season make a push for that Rookie of the Year? I always said, if he comes in and balls out, there's going to be conversations, and that's exactly what's happening right now. He's already getting into that. And the other topic I wanted to touch on is Christian Yelich kind of made an interesting signing the other day, 9 years, $215 million. Extension after, I think, next season. I think he has this year and next year, and then that extension kicks in. So that is an interesting signing for a number of reasons. You got a former MVP signing what looks like a pretty lackluster contract. That's going to really set the market, one would assume, for some of the other guys up and coming, particularly who I'm going to get into here in a few minutes, Fransisco Lindor, who is probably, I'd have to say, the hottest commodity of player who is currently in arbitration, who's set up for a big contract on the way. Mookie Betts obviously is another one, and he already got traded. So, there's obviously conversations about, are they going to trade Lindor? What are they going to do with that? Are they going to stick him out this year? Are they going to trade him this year? Are they going to trade him next year? Are they going to re-sign him? There's just so many things up in the air where that's concerned. And like I said, Mookie Betts is kind of in a similar situation, but they already traded him. And this is the final year of his deal, obviously. And I think slotted for, I have to look it up here in a second, 27 million through arbitration this year, and set up for free agent. Probably going to re-sign with the Dodgers at some point here soon, and lock them in long term. But the biggest player within arbitration with years that is going to be in that Manny Machado. Are they going to trade him? Are they going to keep him? Are they going to trade him earlier, later? What are they going to do with him? That is now Fransisco Lindor, who, it just happens to be on the Indians, who is, like I mentioned, here in Cleveland, our favorite team. So I'm going to have quite a few words to say about the whole topic. But as mentioned, looking forward to next week. Check that out on social with the mock draft stuff. It's going to be fun. And, obviously we got a lot of different things. March Madness is kicking off. Selection show the 15th. Games shortly thereafter, obviously. Tourney round 1 beginning the 19th. You got NFL free agency on March 18th. You got MLB opening day on March 26th. NBA playoffs starting April 18th. NFL draft in late April. So there's so many different topics on all the different sports that are going to be jumping off. So really want to get into some of these other topics we have here on the list today, as mentioned. So, I guess first let's get into this baseball conversation, because that's kind of where a lot of my thoughts and, I've kind of been saving some of these comments, but I think this is a good time to kind of address them, because, there's kind of a little lull. The season's getting underway. You got this spring training coming about. This is when things you expect to start happening. Once you start the season, it seems oftentimes that it's difficult to really work out these long-term big contracts, at the beginning of the year and mid-season and things like that, because, you focus on winning games and all that kind of stuff. So, obviously, like I mentioned, Christian Yelich gets 9 years, $215 million, averages of $24 million a year, and I think that starts after next season. So he's going to be in Milwaukee for the next decade. And the interesting thing that comes to mind where that's concerned is, how is this going to impact what the Indians do with Fransisco Lindor? So, first of all, if anybody thinks that the Indians are going to be able to sign Lindor for anywhere near $24 million a year, they need to go sit back down, because that's not going to happen. It's going to take well over that price tag. We're talking something around, I don't know, $35 million a year. If they offered him 10 years, $350, he might not even take that. That's the interesting thing. And there's kind of been discussions about, does he want to stay in Cleveland even if he gets paid the same amount, knowing that they won't be able to put any other players around him? It's a big question mark and concern I know that he's probably going to have. But there's multiple ways I can go about doing this. So first is trading him. Let's address that really quickly. So you got to look at how things played out with Machado. A similar situation. Baltimore has him, they stink. That's also kind of a different component of the whole thing, is the Indians don't suck right now. They're kind of in the thick of making playoff pushes. They missed playoffs last year, but barely. They should be right in the thick of the mix again this season. So that's a little bit different. But Baltimore waited almost too long to trade Machado because his value had declined so drastically. They trade him mid-season on the final year of his deal before he hits free agency to the Dodgers, ends the season there, and then goes to sign to have his first season in San Diego last season. So that's kind of where we're at with Lindor. Is right now he has this and next season fully on arbitration. So if they traded him right now, obviously they're going to get the team's going to get, who he gets traded to is going to have 2 years of Lindor before they need to really address the contract situation. One would assume they're going to re-sign him before that, but similarly to the Yelich, it's probably going to be an extension beyond his last, legit year on his arbitration contract. So that is a big thing. The Orioles waited too long. I don't know if they thought they weren't going to suck or what, but they waited too long to trade him, and they got less value for him. They could have traded him the year before and got a lot more. That's what everybody will say. Some of the experts talk about what the market was the year before would have been astronomically higher. So that's kind of where we're at Lindor right now. Do we trade him now, get more now, but have him obviously for this less of the season? First of all, I think that demoralizes the locker room and the clubhouse. Your best player in. They missed the playoffs barely last year, as I mentioned. You got injuries already piling up. You need that guy out there to even give you a chance. If he gets traded, I think the clubhouse kind of falls apart and their season is basically a waste. Or you could, other option, save him till next year and trade him. Trade him before the season next year. Obviously, you're going to get less value now, but you'd get more value than if you traded him mid-season. And obviously, if you let his contract expire, he's not going to be re-signing here in Cleveland. The only way Cleveland keeps him is if they sign an extension. He's not going to hit free agency and stick around. There's no shot that happens. So those are kind of the options. How much investment do you want? What's your opportunity cost of trading Fransisco Lindor and the back end of getting these prospects who one would assume are going to be good and eventually make an impact on the MLB roster, but there's a lag and a gap between there. You got to kind of weigh the options of how long your window is going to be of sucking before those guys can come up. Are they going to make a big enough impact? Is it even going to matter? I think they need to just fucking sign the guy. And there's numerous reasons why. First of all, you talk about hamstringing the organization. That's what, the owners and Dolans are going to say, and people who think they should trade him. You sign Lindor to $350 million for 10 years, $35 million goes to one player. Their payroll is barely 100, and right now it's only 80 something. So your payroll is barely 100, and the highest it's been the last who knows how many years has been, I don't know, around 115, 118, something like that. Maybe I don't even think it's even reached 120. So you're hamstrung in that regard, putting all your eggs in one basket in Lindor. Pretty good basket, sure, but all your eggs in one basket. However, you are going to lock in arguably probably the best shortstop in the game. One of the best young talents in the game. Dude has won multiple gold gloves, won a platinum glove or whatever they call it as the best defensive player in the entire league, in the entire major leagues. And he hits, consistently 30 bombs. So no one's going to argue his talent. Also, when you talk about payroll, their payroll, like I mentioned right now, let me pull this up, is somewhere in the ballpark of $85 million. Right now, according to Spotrac.com, however the fuck you say this, they are currently 25th lowest in the league at $84 million per season. So you're telling me the Minnesota Twins have that much more of a market that they can afford a $132 million payroll. There is no argument. The Cincinnati Reds can afford a $133.5 million payroll, but the Indians are hamstrung to be no above 100. Get the fuck out of here. First of all, he's making 17 through arbitration. Let's double that to 35 a year for 10 years, let's just say. You're telling me that still doesn't even put him at 100 million. If they did that, that would add, that would barely put them at 100 million. They would be at 101 million, adding 17 to the payroll, and that would put them up to from 25th up to 20th in payroll for the entire league. You're telling me you can't afford that? Look at the roster right now. It's not that stacked, and you got enough guys to make playoff push. You make the playoffs in the MLB, you have a chance to win a World Series. So keeping Lindor in that respect, even if you just look at the raw numbers like that, yes, Jose Ramirez is getting paid probably less than he should because he's a stud, even though he had a little up and down season last season. But, we had Kluber for all those Cy Young years. He was getting underpaid. We got guys like Clevenger. I mean, he's injured now, but he's getting underpaid based on his value. Shane Bieber, underpaid based on his value. There's a window of opportunity right now to capitalize on this. And if you want to argue about the window of opportunity dissipating later, once all these contracts expire, now you need to spend more money and the market's higher then, you got to bring in some different guys to build around Lindor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's think about this for a second. This is something that I don't understand why the Indians can't contemplate doing. What is to say they can't sign this dude for that 10 years as an extension and then trade him 2 years into that extension year? So you'd get him for 4 more seasons. He's got 8 years on the back end at 35 locked in a year, which is whatever team's going to try to pay him anyways once he hits free agency or as an extension if he gets traded. Let's say he goes to, the Yankees, for instance, which makes a lot of sense, or the Red Sox, whoever. A team is going to want to pay him. A team that's going to want to pay him is going to have to pay him about $35 a year for 10 years. So you're telling me they're not going to do it now because they don't get that front end? They're still going to want him those last 8 years of that contract. He's still young enough. He's still going to be good enough. They're still going to want him. His value is still there. Is it as much there as it would be today? Of course not. But the opportunity cost, as mentioned before, you're getting 4 extra years of Fransisco Lindor. The trade-off and the payoff to those 4 years that you would have him is worth it to me to get less return from prospects down the road, which you're still going to get some decent prospects if you trade how old will he be, Fransisco Lindor? Not even 30-year-old Lindor. I don't know how old he is, but he's not very old. 4 years down the road from now, he's going to have no value? Get out of here. Of course he will. 8 years locked in contract, guaranteed to be on that team for 8 years. Of course they're going to want him. So that could be an option that's never being discussed in the media right now is they're talking about re-sign him or trade him. Why not re-sign him and then trade him? How is that not an option? You don't really see it very often, but oftentimes, we're seeing these gigantic contracts come to guys like Miguel Cabrera who are, getting paid now for what they did earlier in their year. Lindor is in that prime right now where he's going to be getting paid for his prime years 6, 7, 8 years from now when he's still balling out and is going to be looking for another contract, a second contract. And if you're an Indians team that wants to reload at some point and finds that point where, we need to spend more money to build a team around Lindor and we don't have that money, well, then you can look at a rebuild. But right now, that's not where we're at. That's not the case. So the whole Yelich situation kind of ties it all together is I don't really understand why he took so few dollars. And is that going to try to set the market for the Indians so they can come back and say, oh, well, we'll offer Lindor 10 years, $250 million. That's $1 million a year extra than Yelich, or even, 30. I think Lindor turns that down, but then they'll be able to say, to the fans, oh, well, we tried. He said no. Fuck that. I don't know why they're so adamant they have to trade him now or sign him long-term and keep him that entire time. I think there's another option on the table, and that is, as mentioned. And another thing, when you talk about full scope of payroll, as mentioned, the Indians are currently 25th in the league. In payroll, I did some numbers right now, and I wrote these up and took a picture of it a while ago, several weeks back. So in column 1, I have the payroll from last season of all the playoff teams and then their revenue, and then equated the percentage of revenue that they're spending on payroll. There's a lot of different numbers in here that are kind of skewed a little bit. Like, for instance, the New York Yankees have a $223 million payroll, but that's only 33% of their revenue because they make so much goddamn money. $668 million is what this estimated as their revenue. So their revenue, or their cost for their payroll, was only 33% of their revenue. That's pretty low in the grand scheme of things. I took a median of the playoff teams. It was 44% of revenue was spent on player payroll. And another outlier, for instance, was the Tampa Bay Rays. How the fuck the Tampa Bay Rays made the playoffs last year with a $64 million payroll is beyond me. See, these are the outliers that the Indians are going to look at and be like, oh, look what the Rays did. And it's the same thing with the Indians. 2016, they had all these injuries and all these things with their pitchers and everything like that. And they're like, look what we did with the, only 3 pitchers going through the playoffs. Almost won a World Series. We can replicate that. We can just do the same thing next year. That's a fluke. The Tampa Bay Rays are an outlier. I don't know how the fuck they did it, but they did. 28% of their revenue was on payroll, the lowest of all the playoff teams. The Yankees were second lowest. The Dodgers, again, they make so much damn money, even though they have the second highest payroll on this list at $202 million. They're the third lowest in payroll to revenue percentage at 38%. There's the outliers. We're looking at the Washington Nationals as an example. 51%, $172 million versus $356 in revenue, 51%. Atlanta Braves, 42%. St. Louis, 48%. Houston Astros, 169 payroll to 368 revenue, 46%. The Twins were even at 125 to 269 at 46%. Indians, below 40%, 38, tied with the Dodgers, spending 108, getting 282. So like I said, the median I calculated at 44%. That would mean to meet that median, that average right there of the median, the Indians would need to spend $124 million based on last year's 282 projected revenue. $124 million to reach that middle line of payroll to revenue percentage. They're currently, as mentioned, 84%. There's a hell of a lot of wiggle room right there to get up to even the median of what playoff teams are spending on payroll based on their revenue. We're talking $40 million they just have lying there. Oh, there's a particular player who, if you doubled his salary, would put him at $35 million. That's an extra 17. You're still under the 44%. And you still have $23 million to play with to get to that 44%. So these are the numbers that just don't make sense to me. Like, the Indians are selling themselves short, and Fransisco Lindor is an opportunity to show the fans that ownership gives a shit. And also show other players that the ownership gives a shit. Free agents might want to come here. Current players might be more willing to sign an extension knowing that they're willing to spend money and build around a team and try to go for it when they have opportunities to do so. Instead, we're getting the opposite. And they're bitching about, their costs per what it's costing them, and they're losing money year to year basis. Like, I may have said this on this podcast before. If you are an owner of an MLB team, and you are basing your value of your franchise on annual bottom line budgeting, you should not be an owner. The Dolans bought the franchise for roughly $320, something like that, $320 million. It's currently over $1 billion valuation. They've tripled their money. They have a $600+ million profit over a 20-year window. You can lose $5 million a year during that span, and you're still walking away with $500 million in your pocket. And they're not losing $5 million a year, I assure you that. But even if they were, they'd be walking out of their deal of selling their franchise with a $500 million surplus. These are the things that drive me nuts as a fan. When you hear things like, oh, we can't afford it. Like, then don't own the team. I understand it's a business. So why don't you reinvest a little bit and try to go get a World Series, or just sell the fucking team? If you don't want to take a loss, but a potential loss, I don't even know what it would really cost to take a loss. These numbers are obviously all projections, and this 282, like, there's obviously a lot more that goes into, paying for a team. You got a hell of a lot more employees than just the payroll. You got a hell of a lot more expenses than just payroll. But one would assume they're not far off, and they're probably still making money, knowing the Dolans, that's their bottom line. They have to make an annual profit. So there's room to improve or increase that payroll and still make out in the end. And if you're not willing to even take a loss, even if it's slight, and I wonder what that payroll would have to get up to until they, got a loss. There's no way they're ever going to, give those numbers out, I'm sure. But they've already made out, if they sold the team today, they'd be making $500 million in profit. So they need to put money back into the organization or sell the fucking team. That's kind of where I'm at with that. It's kind of frustrating seeing this window of opportunity with all these players on cheap deals like Lindor's and the Ramirez's and the Clevenger balling out. All these guys getting underpaid, undervalued for their contract, and we don't want to do anything about it. And we have an $84 million payroll right now. Like, that's laughable. That's a joke. You've had the best record in the major leagues since Tito got on board, 7-8 years ago? And we're sitting at 25th in payroll and about to drop off once we lose our best player and probably go back to sucking a little bit. Like, who knows what these guys who are coming up through the farm system are going to do. I feel like we got lucky with that Lindor was as good as everybody said he was going to be. And we also lucked out with Jose Ramirez because I don't think anybody saw that coming with how good he's been. Are we going to get lucky and strike gold again with one of these young guys coming up the pipe? Hopefully. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully. But if not, we'll be stuck and we'll be fucked. There's enough room there to build something, and that's what I want to see them do. And we'll get into this a lot more. There's a lot more to come so far as what's going to happen with Lindor and what maybe they'll sign a free agent at some point. Maybe they'll make a trade. Like, who knows what's really going to happen and if this 84 is going to go up or down or what's going to happen. But 84 is trash, and there's plenty of room to grow. Like I said, to get to that 44%, they've got $40 million of wiggle room. So let's make a little bit of that happen. Throw some of that. I mean, you just got rid of Kipnis, sell $16 million. You traded Kluber, you traded Bauer, you got all these guys you got rid of. One would assume was to free up some space in the payroll to throw at Lindor. Let's see if they do it. So, like I said, we'll get back into that. MLB starting up the season here in a couple weeks, and I'm sure we'll talk plenty of baseball on this podcast. And I can guarantee you some of these conversations are going to come up more so down the road. So, moving along in this episode, trying to make this quick, let's get into the NBA very quickly and go over this briefly. So, really, there's not a whole lot to talk about per se because we are still in the middle of the season. Things are kind of shaping up a little bit, coming into, falling into place, if you will. There's still a decent amount of basketball to play, though. There's 20 games or so left. A lot of these, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds are going to be battling. The top seeds are pretty much locked in. I mean, the fucking Bucks have locked in their spot in the playoffs like 3-4 weeks ago, which is insane. It's currently sitting at 53-9. And the Los Angeles Lakers are running away with the West, mainly because LeBron James is having another one of those seasons. And that kind of comes... first I wanted to just briefly mention that Zion versus LeBron matchup from Sunday night was incredible to watch. The fourth quarter LeBron put together was sensational. They had a very straightforward game plan of getting the ball out on the outside wing area and letting shit move, setting things up from there with LeBron touching the ball in his hands each possession and kind of seeing how the defense rotates. LeBron decided if he was going to attack, he's going to kick. And that really set things up. LeBron went off. But Zion, man, that dude is the truth already. I saw some cats on ESPN on Twitter. I don't know if they said it today or yesterday. I saw it today. Talking about how Zion's not big enough and he's undersized and he didn't impact the game when he dropped 21 points in 30 minutes and went to overtime and almost beat the Mavericks. I'm like, what the fuck are we talking about here? Dude is like 6'6", 285. Big ball and shit down low. Getting offensive rebounds for days. Come on. What he needs to do is learn how to shoot goddamn free throw. I don't even know what his percentage is, but it's probably barely 60%. He'd be putting up even better statistics if he was knocking down free throws. But anybody who thinks he's not doing and not impacting games is what the guy said. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Yes, there's plenty of room for his growth and opportunities for him to evolve. Dude is like 19 years old. Of course he's not going to have it all figured out. Of course he's going to have lapses and why is he doing this down low and trying to attack this way when all he has to do is kick it out or dribble out and reset. He gets offensive rebound. Why is he trying to go straight up when some 7-foot guy's right for there's different things that he's doing goofy turnovers, putting up bad shots at times. But in general, he's making athletic plays. He's making the passes where he needs to a lot of the time. He's putting in the work on defense. He's hustling up and down the court. He's grabbing boards. He's doing pretty much on. He's not really getting a whole lot of minutes yet. So, obviously he's going to grow and evolve even more. And hopefully they make this push and make it into the playoffs because if they get that 8 seed, let's see how many games back they are currently. If they get that 8 seed and go against the Lakers in the first round, that would be fun to watch. They'll probably get swept, but I think the games would be a lot of fun to watch. They're currently 5 games behind the Grizzlies. It's looking pretty shaky at this point, but I would love to see them make that push and go up against the Lakers in the first round because all eyes would be on Zion and you really get to see what he would want to do and if he'd be able to step up in the moments, which hasn't really seen. I mean, he's on ESPN been multiple times this season already, but he hasn't seen those big moments in the NBA yet. So it's going to be fun to watch that if that happens. But currently, as mentioned, Grizzlies, Ja Morant versus the Lakers would also be a lot of fun to watch. I think they also probably get swept, but Ja Morant has really been balling. It's going to be hard to argue that he should win the MVP. Yes, Zion's putting up numbers and getting his, but When Ja's been able to do it this entire season, it's hard to argue and compete that he should get the nod. Like, he's going to have a 82-game resume where Zion is going to have half that. That right there is worthy. Like, even if his stats per game are worse, which right now they're about the same, even if they were worse, I'd got to give it to Ja. And as we mentioned, like, could Zion push for it? Yeah, he's pushing for it. And I think he'll continue to do so. But the only way Ja loses is if he kind of blows it and starts sucking it up. Whether, if they go on a 10-game losing streak, he starts sucking ass. They miss the playoffs, and somehow the Pelicans come back from the 5 games, jump all these other teams, make a playoffs. Maybe you can give it to Zion, but there's no reason to think that Ja's going to do anything but continue to ball the fuck out. Dude is dropping 25 a night with ease and pushing almost double-digit assists over the last couple weeks. So it's going to be his award to lose, and I think he's going to lock it up. I'm thinking about 2 weeks. It's going to be about 15 games, 12 games left, and it's going to be clear-cut Ja Morant, Rookie of the Year, no-brainer. But when we look at MVP, there's been a lot of discussions as well about the question is LeBron getting enough credit and love for what he's done and getting enough MVP attention? Obviously, the answer is no, he's not. He's kind of is now that they're talking about the last couple of days. He's been going off, and it's hard to really say that Giannis is not deserving of the MVP. Like, this dude won it last year and has put up better statistics this year. He's getting 2 more points a game. He's getting about 1.5 more rebounds a game and equaling his assist mark. And, oh, by the way, they have the best record in the NBA, which we all know goes a long way. LeBron's been screwed multiple times out of MVPs. Steph Curry got it a couple times because they had the best team, even though LeBron had the best season. Even a couple years ago, I think it was LeBron's last year in Cleveland. I mean, he had a better year than James Harden did, but James Harden got it because he had more wins, or he played in the West or whatever. Like, LeBron's always kind of getting screwed out of it when he's deserving. This year, he deserves an MVP, of course, but that is not going to happen because Giannis deserves it a little bit more. I don't think LeBron's going to get screwed out of the MVP this year. I think it's deservedly going to go to Giannis. I think that was my preseason pick, memory serves, that Giannis would win another MVP. And you know what? He's gonna do it. Like I said, you always see the best team, the best player on the best team probably gets it. But the argument for LeBron comes into effect is he is the most important player, and he has been his entire career. He's the most important player to the team, and if he's not on the team's not very good. If Giannis goes off the Bucks, they're still one of the best teams in the NBA. Like, they're still stacked around him. Yes, LeBron has AD, but he's been injured quite a bit this season. And even if you count out AD, who else they got on that team? Pretty much nobody. It's LeBron, Anthony Davis when he's healthy, and that's it. So, he is more important. And when he's not on the court, they don't play very well. That's kind of what we were talking about. Like, can't count out the Lakers. You can't count out LeBron James. Yeah, dude's in his 17th season. He's 35 years old. But all we've seen him do is evolve his game to be the best version of himself for the moment. Like, he's leading the league in assists with 11 assists almost a game. He's never in his career even averaged double-digit assists at all. He's taking more threes than he has throughout his entire career this season. He's taking less free throws, which one would assume, that means he's attacking the rim a lot less than he has throughout his entire career. So this is the lowest amount of free throw attempts he's taking per game. And like I said, the most 3-point attempts at 6.3 that he's ever taken in his career. So he's molding his game around what he's able to do physically, is my assumption. I mean, yes, they have AD, and that pick and roll game is disgusting. And that's where a lot of his 11 assists a game are coming from. But they don't have a lot around him otherwise. So he's just shifting and molding his game, still getting his 25 a game, still getting his rebounds. He's averaging 8 rebounds a game, which is about his career average. But the way he's led the league in assists is beyond, it's mind-blowing a little bit, to be honest. LeBron James in his 17th season just decides, oh, fuck it, I'm going to just lead the league in assists. It's pretty wild. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the MVP, but I'm more excited to see what happens once these playoffs get underway. A little bit more parity, if you will, in what's going to happen in the NBA standings. Obviously, the Warriors ain't making the fucking playoffs. Finally, we're not going to see the fucking Warriors again. Unfortunately, we're not going to see the Warriors or the Cavs. The Cavs weren't in last year either, but just got some new blood in there. The Bucks are kind of taking it over. The Celtics, I think, are still going to make a deep run. The Heat have surprised a lot of people, including myself. And in the West, I think it's going to be one of the LA teams. There's a lot of talent, obviously the Rockets, the Jazz. We see the Thunder. They got a lot of talent there as well. Like, even the Mavericks, which could be a sneaky team now that Porzingis is back and Luka is continuing to ball the fuck out. So there could be some more interesting matchups and potential upset kind of things. But I still think the Clippers, yes, they've struggled a little bit as of late, dropped a few games. Like I said, almost 6 games back, 5.5 from the Lakers now. I still think, they still, in my opinion, hard to say, but I think that I still got to go with them as my favorite to win it all. It's hard to go against the Lakers and LeBron James, but the Clippers bench is the best in the league, and I got Kawhi and Paul George. Like, how much better can you really ask for? Yeah, the Lakers have 2 of the best players in the NBA, including LeBron, but they don't really have anybody else. Can LeBron, once again, at 35 in his 17th season, carry a team through that many games in a season? He's been in how many games has this dude played when you include his playoff games? A ridiculous amount. Is he going to physically be able to carry his team night after night after night through the playoffs, and particularly, one would assume, against the Clippers in the conference championship, and be able to will them over the hump when it's just him and AD against everybody else? And when that everybody else is fucking Kawhi, who is probably the second best player, I guess third best player in the NBA at this moment. One could argue behind him and Giannis, LeBron and Giannis. And then you add a Paul George in there as well. Plus, your 6th man's Lou Williams is going to win 6th man a year for the 87th time in his career. Like, the Clippers are stacked, and one would assume they're going to have it all together. They're still 42-19. No one's saying that they're, really struggling. They're still number 2 seed in the fucking West, but they're going to have it all together, and, they know how to win. Kawhi knows how to win a championship. So I still think I'm going to have to go with the Clippers over the Lakers. We'll see how that kind of shapes up. But the Bucks, that's going to be obviously my pick for the East. Like I said, the Celtics and the Heat, I think, could give them troubles. The Raptors don't really scare me very much. I think they're still the Raptors. The same old Toronto Raptors. I guess I don't have to run into the Cavs, but same old Raptors, I think. And I think the Bucks are really fucking good, and they got Giannis. So I think they're going to be able to cruise to the East, especially in the early rounds, and then be refreshed and ready to rock and roll against whoever they play, probably the Celtics in the conference championship, and go on to play one of the LA teams, which I think is going to be the Clippers. So I'm looking forward to the remainder of the season, but particularly the beginning of the playoffs. The rest of the season, I like to see kind of what these young guys on these young teams can kind of do on the bottom of the standings to close out the season. But once that's over, they're out of it, and then let's move on to the second round, more or less. But keep an eye on the Mavericks, as mentioned. They might be a sneaky team come playoff time, but still going with the Clippers and the Lakers. So like I said, quick episode here. Wanted to get one knocked out. And be sure to look out for next week. Mock draft video hitting YouTube. That's going to be a lot of fun. If you hear this, see our videos, give it a comment and tell us how fucking idiotic we are making our picks. But regardless, it's going to be interesting. Got a lot on the list of things to come, and a lot of hot topics, I'm sure, to discuss with me and Jeff here on Call on the Field Stands. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week. Peace.